Started the recording. I'll go ahead and get started. And today we are going to be covering the patients module within Study Manager Reveal. For those of you that are seeing this for the first time, what we're going to be covering is really some key functionality, how to find existing study patients, how to access their information and do various things with that information, whether it's adding a study visit or updating a patient status. We'll also be talking about how you can do a more generalized search throughout the database to find patients that may already be set up within the application. And we'll also be looking at patient entry. We'll walk through the process of actually adding a new patient to the database and looking at some of the key characteristics or attributes that you're able to leverage with that. And so right now what I'm going to do is go ahead and just get started and go ahead and log in and get our meeting moving forward. Okay, so to start out with, Study Manager Reveal as a clinical trial management system is intended to provide you with a way to track all of your key study data, and that there's a number of different metrics that it can use to support your overall study data. Today we're going to be looking more specifically at the patient side of the program, and specifically how to, again, search for patients, how to enroll patients into studies, how to add them to the database, and then how to track their progress as you're moving through, as they're moving through the life cycle of a study or the various time points and milestones. One thing I wanted to point out was that Marianne will be able to provide you, or Chico will be able to provide you with a link to your database. So if you haven't already received a link and an account with your username and a password, that will be provided to you. So what I'd like to point out just real briefly is with Reveal, the navigation within the application is all tab-based. Reveal is a web-based clinical trial management system, so you can run it through any browser, and it can be accessed from really anywhere you have an internet connection. All of the key modules, as we call them, or different areas of the program, can be accessed by clicking on the related tabs. So it's a tab-based navigation system. You may find that when you log in, you're not going to necessarily see the same number of tabs that I have up on my screen right now, simply due to the fact that most of the study building and other more administrative areas of the program are going to be centralized and centrally managed. So the place that you'll really be spending most of your time will be right here within the Patients module. And by design, the Patients module is where you land or where you start anytime that you log into Reveal. And the Patients module is one of the few parts of the program that has a number of different subsections. And starting from left to right, we can see as I'm hovering over, there's a place where I can click to add a new patient record, and we'll be looking at that today. There's another subsection where I can actually create searches to find patients throughout the database. There's a third area called Study Patients, and this is the one that you actually will always start out in. This is the place where you can look to see the list of studies that you've been given access to, and then generate existing enrolled patients on the screen, and then access their specific data through the use of what we call the patient profile, and we'll come back to this. There are also a couple of other areas that we may touch on, but really the two key areas that we'll be looking at today and focusing on is Study Patients, where you'll be really spending the majority of your time once you actually get patients into the database and put into studies. And then the second area that we'll be looking at most closely is the patient entry, what we call the Patient Entry Wizard, which is a tool that allows you to walk through a series of steps to create not only a primary patient record, but to also then enroll the patient into the study that they're screening for, that they're participating in. And again, keep in mind that some of the screens that you'll see in my database won't necessarily maybe match exactly the way your database will look. Reveal is an out-of-the-box solution, meaning that you can use it kind of as is, but there are some ways in which the application can be customized to a certain degree. So some of the things that I'll be talking about today, again, are going to be more general in nature. So if you have more process-specific questions, please direct those to Marianne or to Chico. Okay, so the first thing I'd like to do is just start out by coming back to the study patients module, or the study patients section of the patients module. This is the area of Reveal that you'll always land. And let me just demonstrate that again by logging out and logging back in. So if you've been assigned a user account and you actually have been given access to some studies, when you come into the study patients screen, as you'll see we're starting out in here, you're going to be able to pull down a list of studies that you've been given access to. If for some reason you've been given access to a study and you don't see it in this list, it may be that you just need to do an initial search using the blue circle here to search for the study to get it into this active list. For example, let's pretend that this AG409 study is not in my list, yet I've been told by Marianne or someone else that I have been given access. So all I need to do, if I'm not seeing it here, is just click on the search icon, start to type in the first few characters of the study ID, which is really the name of the study, and then a list of related studies will appear in the results. And from there, I'm simply going to select the study, press Enter, and then that will put it into my active list. And then going forward, anytime you log in, you would always see that study, and it would be visible to you. So once you've found the study, you're able to generate a list of patients that are already enrolled into the study by simply clicking on the refresh patient list icon, the one that I'm hovering over now that looks like two arrows moving in a circular fashion. Now, the assumption here is that you already have been given access to one or more studies and that there are patients already enrolled into these studies. So this area of the program has a very specific purpose, and it's called study patients because it will only show patients that are related to or have been enrolled in a specific study or studies. If you're going to do a more generalized search across the database, you will look at that through the search and recruitment tools that are available. So once you've found the study and generated a list of patients, you're able to select any of the patients in the list. And as you do so, the information for the individual patient record will appear on the main part of the screen. And what you see here is what's called the patient profile. And the profile is a tab-based record of all of the patient's information. Starting from left to right, there's demographic data, which is the standard information that's being captured as patients are being added to the database. There's also a slide for medical history that you're not going to be using a whole lot of. This is something more related to what you're probably going to be capturing using your EMR. There's an enrollment tab, which provides you with the ability to update each patient's enrollment history. So as they move through various time points and milestones in the study, you can see, for example, this patient was screening as of December 1st. They were randomized on the 8th. They went into being on study on the 1st of February, and then went into follow-up on April 3rd. So within your database, you're going to have a set of statuses that are available to you. They may look a little bit different from the ones that you see here, but the purpose of this area of the program is to provide you with the ability to update each patient's enrollment status as necessary so that administratively you're able to run enrollment reports not only to show where patients are by status in your study, but across multiple studies throughout the institution. And I'll talk a little bit about this and I'll demonstrate how you can do that. The Visits tab of the patient profile is the place where you're actually able to record study visits as patients complete them. So the idea here is that we're going to be adding visits through what we call a patient checklist, leveraging data that's already been set up. You're not going to be responsible for setting up the checklist. That work will already be done for you based on the studies that you're going to be working with. Marianne and her team will be centralizing the process for actually taking the study schedule and building that out with a list of what we call procedures, and these procedures can be really any event, and Marianne can fill you in a little bit more on the details of how that will work. But essentially, the visit checklist is a place where you will be coming to confirm that a patient came in for a study visit, that the visit was completed. You're going to record the date that the visit was completed, and then using the checkboxes on the visit checklist will confirm which events were either done or not done. And you can also, from the checklist, do things like update the patient's status and update other study level identifiers such as their study ID, their screening number, and other things as well. So we'll come back full circle and look at how that process works. There's also a place on the profile where you can create what are called interactions, and these are essentially patient notes. You can have multiple unlimited interactions per patient. Each interaction stands on its own as its own note. It has a specific date associated with it, and there's a text field that you can use to record any patient specific information. And then the last tab here is the studies and sites, where if you have access to multiple sites, you'll see the end sites part. Otherwise, you would just see studies. And this shows you a list of the studies that the patient has participated in. So if there's a single study, you would just see that. If there are multiple studies, you would see that information reflected. So essentially, the study patients, again, is the place where you'll come to access existing patients. If I flip to the next study, I can click the refresh icon, update the list of patients, and again, by selecting a patient record from anywhere in the list, I can see all of the information, make updates as needed, and then essentially the visit checklist will be the primary place where you will be performing most of your activities. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. So, so we've already touched on the study patients module, and what I'd like to do now is go back a little bit over to the left-hand side of the screen and review the process for how you actually get patients into the database to begin with, and how do you enroll them into the study. So what I'd like to do is create a new patient record and enroll that patient into the AG100 study, and then take that patient, move them through a series of visits, and then update the patient status so I can demonstrate to you the full circle of how your workflow will generally more or less work. So the process for adding new patients really starts over here on the left-hand side of the screen. I'll go ahead and click on the Add New Patients link, and that brings up what's called the Patient Entry Wizard. And basically, this is a tool that you can use to walk through a series of steps to create that full patient profile, as we call it. But unless you're told otherwise, the primary place that you'll be really capturing data is on this first screen. I'm not really going to get into any details related to the rest of the slides, simply because based on some of the other training sessions that we've done, Marianne has indicated to me that, generally speaking, this will be really the primary data store that you'll be expected to capture. So the demographics and enrollments screen on the Patient Entry Wizard really serves two purposes. The first is to capture basic demographic data, and this will then set up a master record within the application. And then the second primary purpose is to enroll the patient into the study that they're participating in, and to set up some initial study level identifiers. So the fields that you see on the screen that we're looking at here that are highlighted in yellow and that have a blue asterisk are ones that are required for entry. So, for example, if I'm entering a patient, and I'm going to only be required on this screen to put in first and last name. Now your screens may look a bit different. I believe that the ID field is going to be required, and that's where you'll map to an existing MRN and supply that as part of the patient record. Marianne, if there's any other information you want to impart, please feel free to enter that in as a chat message, and I can update the group with that. Other than that, I don't know that there's going to be a whole lot of additional data that's going to be expected of you. And again, Marion can fill you in on that. But there are, as you can see, some very obvious demographic fields here, including birth date. Let me just make this somewhat relevant. Birth date. Address, things of that nature. Let me just make this. There we go. And you can see that the application auto updates the age and things of that nature. And so the basic demographic fields, I think, pretty much speak for themselves. The second aspect of then the entry process really then involves searching for the study that the patient is participating in and then enrolling that patient into the study. So the way that you do that is under the enrollment section here, you can see that there's a field for study. And okay, thanks, Marianne. So Marianne's pointing out in the chat that the MRN and patient ID is all we need. So the MRN is where you're going to populate the MRN in the patient ID field. So this is where the MRN will live. So we'll just put that in. So in the enrollment process for the AG100 study, since I know the name of the study, which is AG100, I'm simply going to click into the study field. I'm going to start to key in the first few characters of the study ID, and I'll see a list of studies that match that search criteria. And I'll select by clicking on the AG100 study, and that will automatically then populate that study field. So the only other key attribute that you're going to need to really populate at this point is the patient study ID, as Marianne indicated. And this is going to be the study-specific number provided by the study sponsor for that particular patient. So depending on the naming convention or the numbering convention, I'm sorry, you're just going to populate this field. And it's important to do so because this is the primary way in which you are going to be able to identify each of the study patients from a more de-identified perspective. So this is going to be the primary field associated with the patient for that study. You'll also want to choose an initial status, and then as the patient moves through various time points in the study, you'll want to update that status. But this would be the initial status based on when you're putting the patient into the database as they relate to that study. And then the status date is always directly related to the status and indicates when the patient achieved a certain status. So for example, here, patient is screening as of April 6th. You can also see there are additional fields here for screening number and randomization number. So at this point, really, you're going to be completed in terms of what you're going to be expected to enter in. I'm not going to move, like I said, to the other areas of the profile simply because it's not going to be necessary for you to capture any additional data. So I think you'll find with Reveal that once you get used to using the system, that the process for inputting the data is going to work very intuitively. It's an efficient application. The screens load very quickly, and you're not going to have to spend a whole lot of time out of your already busy days trying to figure out how things work and waiting a long time as data loads. So once you've populated the information and completed filling in whatever fields are necessary, you're simply going to save and close, and then that will add the patient to that study. So now if I come back to the study patient screen and pull up my AG100 study and refresh my list, I should be able to see the patient that I just from, sure enough, there he is. So when I select the patient from the list. The profile, as we described earlier, appears over on the main part of the screen. There's my demographic data. If I need to update any part of this, I can always do that. For example, if I forgot a middle initial and I want to enter that, I can update that and then simply submit to save that change. So the submit button is really important. You always want to remember to do that before moving out to another record. Otherwise, the data will not be saved. Medical history slide, again, is something that you're not really going to be using much of, so I'm not going to spend time talking about this today. Most of the data that relates to how our application stores a patient's medical history and other related information is going to be captured in your EMR. So there's not a need to double enter that data in Reveal. The enrollment tab will show, as we looked at earlier, a history of the patient by status. So as the patient moves through various time points in the study, we're able to update this and update the status date to create a real-time record of where each patient is in the study. And I'll show you some outputs related to that. For example, if I wanted to know administratively where my patient counts are in terms of enrollment for all of my active studies, I can set a report up to show that. And this is just an example. And the reason I wanted to show you is so that you can understand how the data that you're inputting relates back to the types of reports that administrators of the system will want to use. And this is some of the benefit of using a system like Study Manager Reveal. So I'm able to run a report to see all active studies, to see where my enrollment counts are by status. So I can see, for example, the one for the AD100 study, I have 1 patient who's completed, 4 that have dropped, 3 that have failed, 16 that are currently randomized, and combining that with patients that are still screening, a total of 39 patients in that particular study. And then you can see the related information for the rest of the studies, and then down below I can see a total patient status count. So this is a very useful dynamic report that gets updated automatically anytime new patients are added to studies and their statuses are then updated. So I just wanted to point that out so that you have a sense for, again, the day-to-day activities that you're doing, how they can impact reports down the line. So once the patient has been added to the database and enrolled into the study, then really aside from updating their enrollment activities, you're going to primarily be recording and entering visits as they are completed. So this is something that happens after a patient has come in for a study visit. You're going to be logging into Reveal at some point at the end of the day or at the end of the week. Ideally, you want to get this information in a timely manner as possible. But basically, at this point, what you're going to be doing is coming to the Visits tab and adding study visits by clicking on the link on the right-hand side of that screen. And you'll see that when I do so, a little pop-up appears. And from here, if I click the drop-down, I can see a list of all of the study visits that have been set up for this particular study. So this is based on the sponsor's schedule of events. And again, Marianne or someone from her team will have built this study out, and the structure and all of the procedures and other events on the checklist will already be set up for you. And as Marianne points out, per your policy, you need to have the visit checklist, the study visit entered within 48 hours so that the patient is not billed for any of the activities, because Marianne and her group administratively are going to be using the system to keep track of all of the activities that take place, and this is really an important part of tying into that. So basically, you're going to be selecting each visit in the order that it appears here by default. The first visit, my first screening visit appears. I'm simply going to choose a visit status of complete, which would indicate that the visit took place, it was completed. and then the visit date. So I'll just go back to April 6th and do a little back entering. And as Chico is mentioning, for those of you that have your chat up, they're running reports every morning to capture the previous day's visits. So they're really expecting that as patients are coming in, this information is getting captured. And so here is the visit checklist. So once I get through that screen, I'm now working in the visit checklist, a list of all of the various procedures and events as defined by the study builders are going to be on here. And I believe it's my understanding that the only events that you'll see on here are the ones that are billable to research and not any of those that would be considered standard of care. So again, this is just an example of a screening visit, and you can see a list of procedures. And so rather than check each of these items individually, you can simply check the top box next to where it says complete to fill in all of the items or events. And then you're going to want to scroll through to confirm that they in fact were completed or not. So any procedures that have instructions or reminders will have a note, and you'll see that there's a yellow triangle with an exclamation point, which would indicate that information that was intended as an instruction or reminder. For example, there's a note for the chest x-ray that it's not required if films are available from the prior 6 months. So if this was not something that was done, we would simply uncheck it. Also, screen fail is an optional procedure here. I'm going to uncheck that because this patient did not fail at this particular visit. Any procedure on the checklist that has a blue asterisk is indicated as a required procedure. So if I don't check it, for example, the CBC wasn't done because patient didn't fast. If I try to save this visit, I'm going to be prompted that I need to indicate why this wasn't checked off as having been done, because this is a required procedure. So I'm just going to put a note. And then I can save the visit, and that records all of the activities, records the date, and then basically the process is going to be very similar as you move through. We're going to be adding visits for this particular patient. And you'll notice that since we had already added the first visit, the application assumes that we're going to enter the next one. So the next visit in line will always appear. You can override that if you do need to jump out of order based on the study schematic. And again, you're going to be just simply choosing the visit status, the visit date. And I think once you do this a few times, for those of you that may not have used CTMS before, you'll find this is a very easy system to get to know, to get to use. Again, here's a list of my procedures. Patient did not screen fail, so I'm not going to check that. No screen fail, I'll put a note, and then I'll save. And so all I'm doing is running through this process. I'll even do one more example. I'll add another visit. This is my baseline visit, my randomization visit. So again, I'm going to indicate when that occurred. I'm going to run through the list of events and procedures. I want to do so in a way that I'm confirming that everything that I'm checking off was in fact done. I'm using this as a shortcut just to fill them all in, but then I'm going to carefully review each item. And at this point, since this is the randomization visit, I can update the patient status from here with the appropriate related date and save that. Or I could have always gone back to the enrollment tab and updated it from there. So there are two different places that you can actually update the patient's status from. And so that's really the full circle. We've taken a patient, we've enrolled them into the study, we've added them, added some study visits, we've updated the enrollment, and by and large, that's going to be the primary sets of activities that you're going to be performing as well as you're using Reveal. Now, one thing I'd like to touch on real briefly is the tools that are available to find patients outside of ones that are already enrolled into studies. For example, some of you, based on your site permissions or based on study access, may not be able to see a patient that already exists in the database. For example, if I maybe don't have access to the AG100 study and I'm going to go add a new patient and I can't see that Franklin Doe already exists, if I try to save that record, let me just choose that site, I'm going to get a warning that tells me that this patient's information matches one patient in the system. And so if I can't see that patient and they're not in a study that's in my current active list, this is where you're going to want to use the search and recruitment tool. So if you're adding a new patient, you get a feedback or that message that the patient already exists, you're going to want to run to the search and recruitment screen and use the quick search tools to find that patient, and then add them to whatever study it is you need to. Because there can only be one master record for each patient in the system, but that patient can be associated with multiple studies. So what I'd like to point out real quickly, and again, if you have any questions after the training session, you can always call Marianne or Chico. They can help you get these set up. When you come into the quick search screen for the first time, and this is the place where you can, just as the name implies, run very quick searches to look up patient information. You're going to need to add at least one quick search field to your view. And this is a user-specific setting. It's not something that Marianne or anyone else can set up for you. So when you come into this particular screen for the first time logging into Reveal, simply click on the icon on the far right-hand side of the screen, the one that looks like 2 gears, and then you can select up to 4 quick search fields. I like to just choose a couple, first name, last name, and save those. And then those will get saved to your profile. So every time you log in, those fields will be available. So this is where if I wanted to, I got that message saying that Franklin Doe already existed in the database. I'm just going to do a quick search on last name and first initial, and then I'll press enter as the quick search tip indicates, and that'll generate a list of any patients that match that criteria. So I can see there's a list of 5 patients, 5 records, and if I click on Franklin Doe, that will bring up his profile, and I can in fact now see, okay, this is the same Franklin Doe. I'm going to add, that particular patient to another study. So it really just depends on the situation. You may not run into this too often, but if you do, there are ways to search for patients and look up information related to patient demographics outside of the study patients screen, which again really is specific to patients that are already enrolled into a study. So that's essentially the main points that we've been covering in the prior training sessions and that I wanted to touch on today. I'm assuming that there are probably some of you on the call that have used the older version of Study Manager. So maybe the leap to Reveal will be pretty easy for you simply because you're going to find that there are quite a few less screens you have to move through and clicks that you have to make to do certain activities. For those of you that are brand new to Reveal and CTMS, I think you'll find this is a very, again, easy system to use, and hopefully you'll be up and running very quickly. But at this time, I would like to just ask if you do have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat portion of the control panel. We had a couple comments from Marianne and Chico that were posted up there. Chico, just to address your original question, the quantity of labs would need to be entered through the notes field on the checklist. So Chico asked about entering quantity of labs, so on a study visit if there are multiple blood draws. Unfortunately, there's not a quantity field that you can update, but rather what you could do is use the notes section to indicate the quantity here. And these are reportable and can be incorporated into any patient-level reports that the administrators are running. So this is what you would use, as Chico is referring to, if you do need to indicate that multiple of any activity took place within a study visit. Are there any other questions from the group? Any comments